I'm very pleased to kick off the roundtable on the future of heterodox social science, and we're very fortunate, actually, to have, it's often said that one of the problems that heterodox social scientists face is gatekeeping, and we know the studies which have shown quite clearly that if you have the wrong views, you're unlikely to get published, and in fact, a lot of people openly say they discriminate against right-leaning academic paper. And so it's incredibly important that we start to think about a new ecosystem and a new sort of infrastructure of journals where this kind of work can be published. And so we've got actually 4 journal editors today of journals which I think I can reliably say are heterodox, and you won't face the gatekeeping function. So we have Kevin McCaffrey from Theory and Society, Lee Jussim from the Journal of
Open Inquiry in the Behavioral Sciences.
Open Inquiry in the Behavioral Sciences, JOIBS. We have Francesca Minerva, the Journal of Controversial Ideas, and we've got Bob Maranto from the Journal of School Choice. I'm going to give them each, I think probably 5 to 10 minutes to set up their stall, and then we can have some questions. If you keep it at the shorter end, we can then have a bit of a discussion. I'll start with Kevin. So Kevin, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. So I don't know how many of you know the story of Theory and Society, or the recent story. But this was it's one of the longest running theory journals in the social sciences, the longest running theory journal in sociology, the oldest theory journal in sociology, the first theory journal in sociology, founded by Alvin Goldner, who was a Marxist, although that's really an oversimplification. He was a really bright guy and did a lot of interesting things. But he died, and his wife took over the journal, and she was editor for 40 years. The kinds of submissions they got tended to be pretty similar to one another. They tended to have similar ideological bents, but that wasn't the problem from the standpoint of the publisher. The publisher did not reach out to the former editor with their concerns because of the content that was being published. It was how the journal was run. The turnaround times, so from submission to acceptance, would be around 2 years. So, we can talk about the myopic scope of the content that was published in the journal, how safe it was, radical from the outside, the ideas, but very par for the course within sociology. And that is ultimately why Springer was wanting new leadership, is the turnaround times. But I think that the long turnaround times, the 2-year turnaround times, this kind of lackadaisical approach to the publishing and editing process was in fact reflected in the content of the journal. It was lazy, it was not risky, it was not dangerous, it was not fun. And so Springer reached out to my mentor, Jonathan Turner, and myself, offered us to interview for the position. We did. I was very honest with Springer. I said, I will shorten these turnaround times to nothing you've ever seen. Our time to first decision now is 19 days. I have no editorial assistance. I just, I don't want to give myself too much credit. I wouldn't even be able to have sustained the journal for a month without my editorial board, without the brilliant people that have published in that journal that I admire and respect from all across the social sciences. But the time to first decision now, the median time is 19 days. And I just, I'm more than happy to go into more detail, but the journal is on the upswing. We published Eric's outstanding piece. We published.
Battery.
That's okay. I can talk about
it.
Okay. We published pieces that I, in my wildest dreams, could not have imagined being published in a sociology journal, just because of how generative they are, how novel they are, how unique they are, how creative they are. And I just want to say that honestly, what has motivated me, because I'm relatively young in my career, it was a kind of career suicide to take on this journal, at least from the mainstream of the discipline. But I never thought twice about having to do it or wanting to do it. And the reason why, and this gets to a deeper point, which is I'm concerned that when we call ourselves heterodox social scientists, although that's descriptively true, we're defining ourselves as outsiders. And there's absolutely nothing outsider about finding the adventure of truth-seeking again, finding the excitement of asking questions, following that candle in the dark. I mean, in that sense, the people in this room are carrying on the legacy of science and of social science. And so, yes, we're heterodox scholars, and yes, Theory and Society is, I suppose, a heterodox journal at the moment, although I'll publish anything that's good. But I don't see ourselves as heterodox scholars. I see ourselves as carrying the mantle of what makes science fun and what makes science illuminating, and as the part of science that emphasizes the best human values of courage and adventure and so on. So I'll stop with that.
Yes, okay. Yeah. All right. That was really short. Yeah, I cannot keep that short. So the general topic here is post-progressive social science, and the fields are so captured by the far left. The one piece of the big solution is to form new institutions, organizations, and societies. That's not really the topic of this roundtable, but this is what I'm going to talk about is the journal of the Society for Open Inquiry Behavioral Sciences. We organized the society, we started organizing in 2020, 2021, launched in 2022, and it is explicitly organized to address the dysfunctions that we've been talking about for the last 3 days. Now I'm going to talk specifically about the journal. But the journal has emerged from this dysfunctional intellectual context within which we all find ourselves. This next stuff is from an amazing article by Adam Mastriani, a cognitive psychologist, called The Rise and Fall of Peer Review. So this is paraphrases and quotes from this article. It's really, I need profanity. It's an amazing article. Okay, so scientists, despite their posturing about the importance of peer review and the value of peer review and things only count if it's peer review, he points out if scientists cared a lot about peer review, when their papers got reviewed and rejected, they would listen to the feedback, do more studies, rewrite the paper. Instead, what they usually do is just submit it to another journal. Continuing, if they really cared about peer review, they would keep the reviews. But once the paper gets published, the reviews are usually entirely memory hold. Nobody cares to find out what the reviewers said, what their criticisms were, or how the paper was changed. So we do not act like we're gaming the system. We care about it to get published. We don't care about the substance. In general, most of the time, most of us could not give a shit about what the reviewers say. We just want to get the thing published. Okay. So, he's now talking about the fall of peer review. He goes on like this, referring to the fall of peer review. Honestly, I'm so relieved. The system sucked. Waiting months just to hear that an editor didn't think a paper deserved to be reviewed? This is nuts. Reading long walls of text from reviewers who for some reason thought your paper was the source of all evil in the universe? Spending a whole day emailing a journal, begging them to let you use the word years instead of always abbreviating it to Y for no reason? This literally happened to me. That's him, not me. I can tell you my own story. Okay, we never have to do that ever again. It sort of goes on like this. Okay, and then he continues. I know we all might be a little disappointed we wasted so much time, but there's no shame in a failed experiment. Yeah, we should have taken a peer review for a test run before we made it universal. But that's okay. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and now we know it wasn't. That's science. It'll always be important for scientists to comment on each other's ideas, of course. It's just this particular way of doing it didn't particularly work. Okay, so what's he talking about? For most of human history, going back to antiquity, there was no peer review. Peer review is an invention that's evolved over the last 100 years. Neither Newton nor Einstein needed peer review. And you could make the case that there's not a shred of evidence that science has gotten any better. In fact, if anything, probably the pace of scientific innovation has flattened since we have undertaken peer review. I don't know whether that's causal effect there, but you would think if peer review was some sort of accelerant for the quality of science, it's the opposite of what you would expect to happen. Okay, you can see the appeal of the idea before allowing some scientific finding out into the rest of the world. Let's have some expert or group of experts review the paper before circulating just to make sure it's a really great paper. That was the idea, and it's a sort of seductive idea. But the point is, it never delivered what it promised. So this is going back to Mastriani's piece, which is completely amazing. By one estimate, scientists collectively spend 15,000 years reviewing papers every year. It can take months or years for a paper to wind its way through the system, which is a big chunk of time when people are trying to do things like cure cancer or stop climate change. And universities fork over millions of dollars to these journals that charge these exorbitant fees. Okay. So there's really, not only is there no evidence, I haven't seen any evidence for dramatic benefits of peer review, what we actually have, at least in social sciences, also in biomed, is a nasty replication crisis. I mean, my own blog site, about a year ago, I have a blog titled, about 75% of claims in psychology journals are wrong. And it starts with the replication failure rate is about 50%. And then it goes up from there because claims can be wrong even if they're based on replicable research. So for one of the most common patterns in psychology, there's two studies, an original, a much more rigorous, highly powered, multi-study failed replication. For years after that comes out, people are still citing the original at much higher rates than the failed replication. It's wrong. I was just wrong. And then you saw who was it? It was Zachary's talk on diversity, the benefits of diversity in science, pointed out that there are all these claims in the literature that aren't backed up with anything. They're literally not backed up with anything. That it's a peer-reviewed article, diversity improves science, no reference. Okay, so, and peer review was probably not the most frequent, but the worst kind of problem in empirical literature is fraud, is people making up data and horrendous exams. And peer review isn't even designed to catch that. I mean, for the most part, there's a tiny number of journals that will do screens for this, but not most journals. And so fraud is, routinely not captured throughout the journals. Peer review is not designed to do that. Okay. There are additional problems. Wasn't really talked about much at this conference, but a common experience with conventional academic, especially social science, humanities journals, is for them to retract papers when faced with social media mobs or online petitions. These are papers that have passed peer review. Some people are pissed about it. Maybe a lot of people are pissed about it, and they'll retract it. And what's ironic there is if there are credible allegations of rampant data error or fraud, those papers can take 8 or 10 years to get retracted, if they get retracted at all. But if there's a social justice, social media mob, it gets retracted. Okay. We know that conventional social science journals are riddled with biases. There's publication biases. There's all sorts of publication biases. The most notorious is the bias against the null hypothesis, right? So if somebody conducts a study, they find nothing, really hard, find no significant effects or few significant, very hard to get that published. There's a little bit of reform effort underway. It's probably slightly less difficult now than it used to be, but that is easily demonstrable. There are comparisons in the literature of the conventional studies, empirical studies of the literature. About 90% of those confirm their hypotheses with significant results. And then that's compared to registered reports. And with a registered report, the researcher submits a proposal to the journal about what they're going to do. The journal makes an in-principle decision based on the proposal and commits to publishing it no matter how the damn thing comes out. Those there's different kinds. There's new studies on new topics and replications. The replication run rate there is between 40 and 50%. And even the hypothesis confirmation rate is only about half. So you have the conventional literature where, we're brilliant. Everything we say is always true, comes out 95% of the time. But when we say what we're going to do in advance and are compelled to stick to it, we're at best 40, 50%. Now, not saying what we're doing is all junk, right? But statistical things, it would only be right 5%. If we completely have no insight, no expertise, and doing things appropriately, that's a whole other issue. We would only be right 5%, right 5% of the time. That would just be random. There'd be no there. That's not the case. 40-50% is not terrible, but the journals look like we're confirming our hypotheses 90% of the time, and that's just wrong. Okay, so there's that. There's there's the kind of political biases, the difficulty of publishing counter-narrative, anything kind of that runs against sort of cherished left wing. I don't want to overstate that. It is absolutely possible, and people do publish that's not mutually exclusive with it being more difficult and there being biases rigged in the system with respect to that. There are status biases. It's way easier for senior faculty to get stuff published than it is for new junior faculty. And it just goes. There's been this rise. It's not a majority of journals, but it's increasing for journals to require positionality statements, which, there's this delusion that this somehow it reveals the biases in the literature. I mean, I think there is bias. There absolutely is bias, and there are ways to rigorously identify biases in literature, but knowing the person's positionality tells you nothing, literally nothing, about whatever biases there may be in the particular paper. Okay. So what is the point? So when Zoids first was organized, and we were trying to figure out, well, what did we want this journal to be? As far as I can tell, the main value of scientific publishing is for scientists to communicate their work to other scientists. That's the main point. Now, if I make my work available to you, it's now available to you. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to think I did it well. That's on you. But I now, whether it's me or you or whatever, right? That's the point. It's for us to communicate with each other. So what that meant, operationally, is we wanted as little gatekeeping as possible. So with Zoids, we do not have it with we have conventional peer review, but the requirement has to be new empirical data with humans. So if you do rat studies, we're not going to publish it. If you're doing a theory paper, we're not going to publish it. But it doesn't matter whether your results are significant or not. I'm editor-in-chief. It doesn't matter whether I like your paper. I think it's unimportant, boring, trivial. I don't know why anybody would even read this. But if it doesn't say anything manifestly wrong, right? I mean, that's an issue. I'll try to negotiate that with the authors. And it's legible, right? It's coherent. You can read it and you understand what the person is saying. We're going to publish it. It's not my place to say whether it's important. I have the right to have my opinion about whether it's important or not, but it's not my place to say whether your work is important. That is, I'm very sort of Jonathan Rauschian, let everybody else decide what to make of this work, right? And if the rest of the world thinks your work is unimportant, it's not going to go anywhere. That's fine. And if I underestimate your work and other people think it's far more important, it's out there now. So that is a communal process for all of us. So we have this sort of minimal, there's some gatekeeping, but minimal gatekeeping. I don't want to say this is the only model. Actually, I would revert to an intellectual diversity model when thinking about reforming the field. So if there are other journals that have very intense, very rigorous processes for deciding what to publish, I would endorse that also. So what might that look like? And I think a small number of journals have this. You submit an empirical paper there, they have data analysts on hand to reproduce what you say you've done to make sure what is reported in the paper actually is based on the data that you have presented with the paper. It requires you to produce your data. They also have statisticians and methodologists as part of their review board to evaluate whether you did this in the optimal way possible, whether your statistics are appropriate, whether your inferences are justified. That's completely fine. I think we should have, but that's not Zoids. That is not what our journal is. Our journal is you do what you think you have to do, short of saying anything manifestly wrong, we're going to publish the journal. published the article. And so, we have a fair amount of controversial stuff in there. And we have a paper that's probably about to be published on men's experience with voluntary gay conversion therapy. Gay conversion therapy is a hot topic, right? It's a third rail type topic. But this is voluntary. And this, I had to learn about this. I didn't know anything about this until I read this paper. But in certain communities in the States, certainly some very religious Christian communities, being gay, having gay ideation is a problem if you're deeply embedded in some deeply religious Christian community. More than half the sample are Mormons. And so this is a conflict for these men, and there are probably many ways to deal with it, but one of them is this voluntary gay conversion. So this is a study on this, and the upshot of this was that most, but not all of them, reported being satisfied with their experience in this therapy. Anyway, there's no reason that shouldn't get out into the world, and make it whatever you want with that. It wasn't an experimental study or a randomized clinical trial, and who knows what the long-term effects were, and that's what the community is here to do, is skeptically vet this and evaluate it. And I'm not saying I personally endorse this, but it doesn't matter whether I endorse it or not. That's completely irrelevant. So that's a paper that's out there. There was a paper on an assessment of parents' beliefs about the rapidity with which their teenage children manifested gender dysphoria. It's called rapid onset gender dysphoria. It was actually published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, sort of prestigious journal in that area. And there was a social media mob. Paper was denounced, and it was ultimately retracted. We have published that paper. Part of our, right in our instructions, actually, I probably should have quoted it, is that we will never retract a paper in response to a mob. Now, if the mob identifies something like fraud, well, we're still not doing it in response. We are alerted to that by the mob, but if there is clear evidence of fraud, that's a different animal. But if they're just pissed off, if they don't like the methodology, well, it is a hopeless case on their part for us to retract the paper. And that's stated on the front page of the journal. Okay, that gives you a flavor of Joyce, the flavor of how to create new organizations and new systems to really create, I think, this is how I think of it, to create islands of integrity in this vast sea of political corruption.
Thank you, Lee. From one island to another, I'm going to give it over to Francesca here to talk about the Journal of Controversial Ideas.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm the co-editor and co-founder of the Journal of Controversial Ideas, together with two other philosophers. I'm a philosopher myself, Peter Singer and Jeff McMahon. So the idea of this journal came to me around 2012 when I was cancelled by the right, one of the few people maybe to be cancelled by the right and by conservatives for publishing a paper arguing that the moral status of newborn is similar, identical to that of fetuses and embryos, and different from that of grown-up adults like us, and that I got a lot of death threats and a lot of articles in newspapers. So it was kind of a stressful time, but as you can imagine. But at the beginning, okay, this is weird. Why is this happening? I think it was one of the first academic papers to go like really viral on the internet. Oh, wow. Because you don't expect like thousands of philosophers to really read philosophy papers. So that was like, oh, this is new. But then I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that coming at all. And I still get some death threats now, like 15 years later, or like 10 years, 13 years later. But then like things started changing in a direction that we started thinking, okay, this is getting worse. Like Rebecca Tuvell, and maybe you remember her paper on transracialism, in which she arguing like,
Oh, yeah.
why if we think that
Yeah.
people can change sex, we don't think that people can change race. And she also, like, the editorial board of the journal where she published this paper resigned, and there were petitions to have the paper retracted. And then there was the case of Bruce Gillis with the colonialism paper, also requests to get the paper retracted, and the editors got death threats, and I think eventually was retracted. And Nigel Bigger, defending that paper, also got petitions. So okay, what's going on? That was around 2015, not that it's going to working. So at that point, okay, we need to do something about it. So I started talking about this to Peter and Jeff, and we decided to start this journal, Controversial Ideas. And this, I think we published the first issue in October 2021. This is a peer-reviewed, open access journal, so everybody can just go on the journal, download the paper without paying anything. And the interesting thing, maybe what makes it different apart from publishing controversial papers, is that authors can choose to publish anonymously or like using a pseudonym, because we thought that especially people who are not tenured would self-censor themselves or like not really publish their articles for fear of being either the object of a mob like online shitstorm, or just like risk their career, would endanger their career. So we give the option of publishing using a pseudonym, and a few people have decided to do that. And then after a few years, if they get tenured, they can ask us to publish the article again with the real name, update, and we have done that as well. Our main concern was actually this concern about like not only self-censorship, but also what kind of research and what kind of truth we were gonna miss on, right? Because if people are scared of asking certain questions and trying to find the truth about these questions, it's not just like, the problem is not like the one person not pursuing that question, but like whole fields, all questions that's been shut down as it happens, and that has happened, as you know. So we were worried about that, and we hope that the journal won't be necessary for a long time, and that other journal will start publishing more controversial papers. And it's interesting because like one of our goals was to actually raise the bar for what is considered controversial. So we thought if we publish like really controversial stuff in our journal, then people won't overreact to a thing that seems like, because at some point, it seemed like any paper was considered controversial. Like from some papers, like I really didn't think they were gonna consider controversial, but then there were petitions to get this paper retracted, and it seemed that the bar for what was considered controversial got like really, really, really low. And so that was one of our goals. And yes, I hope the journal won't be necessary for a long time, and that other normal journals will publish ideas that are not really like controversial. Just the concept of controversial itself is interesting, but I think it gets what gets you death threats. Like if you get death threats for something you write, then that's controversial. But it changes from place to place, from time to time. We were also hoping to get like a map of what is controversial in different places, but we didn't really get a lot of submissions from outside Europe and the US, so that didn't go as planned, but hopefully we will get more as the journal is more well known. Please feel free to send to us your controversial papers, and please accept my invitations to review the papers when I send you one. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, this is a little weird. I've already talked about my journal, so I'll just briefly say what I said before, and I have a handout over there I think that covers it. And then I have 5 points about what everyone else has said. So I guess I do have something to say. I do have some purpose, I guess. So my journal, I edit the journal School Choice, and I took it over 10 years ago, and it was more or less the journal for School Choice, and I wanted to make it the journal of School Choice. So I have a much more ideologically diverse editorial board. Education journals are almost all hospital to school choice, except mine. We used to be almost all people who supported it. Now I have an editorial board that about a third are choice skeptics, which I think is good. And when I get a submission, I try very hard. You have to ask 14 people to get 3, but I try very hard to ask 7 people who I think are inclined to like the findings, and 7 who are, I think, inclined not to like it. So, but actually, I'm pleasantly surprised. Oftentimes people, they try really hard to be objective, and they override their priors and just try to go with the methods. And I think that's actually kind of positive. It's actually kind of neat, and it's different from a lot of the education field. I must be picking good people, I think. It's a fun journal. We have a minute of 19 days, but when I took over, we had about 6 months, usually from first issue. Now we're usually, I think I promised 10 weeks. We're usually right around 10 weeks or a little less. So that's not too bad. I've used that as one selling point. And it's been fun to edit it. I've been trying to pawn it off to a colleague for 3 years now, but he keeps getting grants and things and doing other things university values, so I can't do that. But our impact factor has improved a lot. We're solidly second here. But that's about me. Let me talk about some of what you guys have said. First off, Lee, I love you, but you have this totally wrong. You said that the goal of publication is to advance knowledge and get stuff through and get your studies out to other social scientists and all. That is not the goal of publication. The goal of publication is tenure and promotion, right? we all know this, right? And so that, and a little bit of that is fine. I would say we've gone way too far in that direction. And I see you have the Free Inquiry Papers book, so you got the other copy. It's excellent. Hold it up for a second. Just published by EI.
Right there.
Lee and Sally are co-editors. We have a lot of great essays on why free inquiry is important and how we're losing it and how we can bring it back. And we have a little paper out there on our recommendations. But one of my chapters is on bureaucracy. And I start out with Dwight Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech, President Eisenhower's farewell address in 1961. And people don't usually know that before he was president of America, he was president of Columbia, not the country, the university. And he actually knew a lot about how universities work, aside from invading Europe successfully and helping save the world and all that. And he has a military-industrial complex speech, only 4 pages, and it's brilliant. And he has 2 paragraphs on universities. And essentially what he says is that as universities become dependent on government funding, we will become bureaucratized, and we will start caring more about pleasing whoever's in government and getting the grants than we will about teaching students or about personal curiosity. And I think it was a very powerful statement. He said that prestige is all going to people with giant labs and computers and all that. And he said in the long term, if we didn't think very carefully about how to manage that relationship between government and higher ed, and he wasn't for getting rid of it. He wasn't like some are, but he was deeply concerned about the impacts that would have. It occurs to me a lot. My dissertation I did back in 1989. Other than my sweat equity, it cost about $1,000. It'll be about $3,000 now. I got 2 books out of it. I got 12 articles out of it. I changed my field, political science, a little bit, which was kind of fun. I didn't think I'd have that kind of impact, but I did. It was kind of neat. I couldn't do it now. I'd have trouble getting even the survey through the Institutional Review Board. And I wasn't asking anything controversial, although as you showed, asking controversial questions does not harm people. But I would have trouble getting it through the IRB. It would have taken a long time. I would have needed to get a grant to do it, et cetera, et cetera. We've created a bureaucratic enterprise that's very inequitable. It's inequitable for junior faculty and grad students who need to publish quickly. And I realize in the sciences, you guys need heavy equipment. Sometimes you have to do that. Most of us don't, honestly. A lot of us could do great work for $1,000, $2,000. It's very unfair to people in developing countries who don't even have IRB. They just had a publication held up because my co-authors from Bangladesh, he collected I wrote and did a lot of framing, but he collected the data. Bangladesh doesn't do IRBs. He had a letter from his dean, and we had a consent letter. It wasn't enough. So we've had I think now 2 journals turned it down for not having an IRB. We've erected this huge bureaucratic system that needs to be reinvented. And, I hope we spend more time thinking about how to do that. And among other things, that will bring us more equity. It will also bring us way better science. And it will move power from people who are really just bureaucrats, who honestly shouldn't be leading universities, more to people, like the Steven Pinkers, and like the Richards, people, and like the Lee Jussims, and like the Francescas, people who really should be running universities. That was partly President Eisenhower's. that was part, and Kevin, that was partly President Eisenhower's insight, and it was a brilliant insight, and we really need to heed it. A third point I'll make, I've come up with all these ideas while here, is class. So last night, Richard and Kevin and I were at dinner, and we had a 4th person who said the same thing. So I'm curious, when I look around this gathering, you guys don't look like normal social scientists. And that's not an insult. So, let me ask you, how many people had 1 or 2 or 3 parents who never went to college? I'm guessing, and can you get us the data? Okay, can you get us the data from people here? I am guessing that that's very unusual in the social science. Your dad was in the UAW, right?
Yeah.
My dad was a postal manager. Your dad was a postal worker, etc. We are not normal. And one thing that Haidt and Lukianoff say in The Coddling of the American Mind is that we need more blue-collar people going into this area for all kinds of reasons. One of the reasons is they're doing it because they really love it, because they've done other stuff. Lucy, you were selling shoes, right, as I recall, before you got into this line of work.
Before I became an Ivy League intellectual.
And that inspired, your book is wonderful, and that comes out in the first few pages about how you look at the world a little differently. We need more people like us invading the academy if we want the academy to have credibility, but also be full of people who are intellectually curious, who are doing this because they want to do it, and not just because it's a safe and reasonably well-paid job, which at least as elite institutions has a little bit of prestige. So that was something that came up. We've got to do that research and see. People here, I'll bet they're a little different than regular academics.
Maybe we'll run a survey.
The class, and Lukianoff and Haidt kind of talked about that a little bit in Coddling. So my 4th point, and I came up with this last night, but man, Francesca, that really reminds me of it, death threat science. So a lot of the sex researchers I know have had death threats. I'm a political scientist, I've had threats, but not death threats. It would be, you could actually edit a really good book. Professors Speak Out was on professors who got fired. You could actually edit a really fascinating book, or maybe have a Colette article, where's Claire? Somewhere, on people who have done work that in any realistic world should not be getting them threatened, and certainly not death threats, and certainly not people saying, I know where your children go to school. But yet, that happens a lot, and the media never reports it, right? If some crazy person on the alt-right were doing it, I'd read about it in PBS and NPR, and Southern Poverty Law Center would have a thing, and the FBI would be on it. But because it's happening, obviously, you're from the right, which is interesting. For most of us, more from the left, we're not talking about it. You could edit, you could have a great essay, you could have a great book on death threat science, death threat social science. Who's getting threatened? Why? How do we study this? How do we stop it? Hopefully not with, but by the way, I was on a school board for years, and people would get a little testy sometimes, so I never felt threatened, except by an employee we fired. I felt a little threatened, but it was harmless in there. The last administration asked the FBI to look at parents who were a little feisty in school board meetings, and which I thought they should not have done, but the American School Board Association asked them to, and ended up losing half its membership over it. They got some negative feedback on that. The U.S. school boards have some power. The FBI, to its credit, looked at all 25 cases, and in 24 said there's no crime at all, or if there's something, maybe it's a local police thing, and they should talk to somebody. And one case was a little different, one of the 25. I worry a little bit in the current administration if Kash Patel, the current director of the U.S. FBI, is asked to do that. I worry the results will be different in a not good way. But there are real threats sometimes. The Death Threat Science. It's got to have that article, maybe book. Final thing I'll say, I'll turn back to Lee. So we founded SOI. It's mostly you. I helped a tiny bit. I think Richard Redding.
It was Nate. Are you here?
Nate's played
It was Nate's idea. No, it was Nate's idea.
It was Nate's idea.
Nate's
Stand up.
idea.
Stand up, Nate Honeycutt. He is teaching adjunct at the University of Arkansas and working for FIRE, and someday we'll get a tenure track job. You've got, what, 1,500 citations? You're an incredible psychologist. So it was your idea. So one of the rationales for it, I think, was that Heterodox Academy was being too wimpy, and we needed to be a little more aggressive. I actually think, and maybe it's us, maybe it's events, Heterodox has gotten a lot better.
I agree with that. It was true at the time,
Yeah.
but I agree with that.
And there's no reason not to have both, but I think Heterodox has kind of cleaned up its act,
Yeah.
and that's a really good thing, and maybe we played some...
Can I say something about this cancel
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
I wish we would reframe this. So when John and I took over Theory and Society, there was an attempt from honestly the entire side of the discipline that was on Twitter at the time. They came after us. They tried to cancel and boycott the journal. It sucked. I got emails that I didn't like getting. But you know, in retrospect, when I'm going through this and I'm trying to justify what the fuck am I doing, you know, I realized that, you know, had that mob never come, I would not have seen the limits of my own courage. And when that mob was gone and I'm sitting alone in my room and I'm trying to figure out what project I want to do next, that mob is still in your mind. So yes, it's horrible to be attacked like that so unfairly. But at the same time, you know, to be an editor, to be a scholar, it's as much, I think, about character as it is about intellect.
Yep.
And the way I framed it to myself was it was an opportunity to stress test my courage. And once that was over, and nobody's angry at me, hopefully, at some point, and I'm sitting in my room, that I will pursue ideas that I wouldn't have otherwise pursued. And so it's I worry that oftentimes when we look at this cancel thing, it's all about the horrible side, and it is horrible, but there's a genuine stress test and a genuine benefit to it that I don't know that I would have. I was able to wake a part of myself that I don't know I would have been able to.
Kevin, where did you get character?
Well, that's a hard question, but I think going back to your issue of working class.
Whiskey. No, I'm joking.
That's too much. That's too much.
May I say something about that?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think there are two types of, you know, cancellation. And I think I was among the lucky ones because the death threats, whatever, you know.
Oh, that's-
they were not, you know, I was a bit scared, you know. I was like, I think I was very lucky because it didn't really. It affected my career. It took me then 15 years to get a permanent job. I think I should have gotten a bit earlier, but it wasn't really coming mostly from other academics. But when you're cancelled by other academics, that's when it gets scary. When you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, other academics, signing a petition and sending it to your institution to get you fired, that's going to destroy your life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, that's the kind of cancellation and again, I would like to say, I used to be really mad about it, but I got to a different conclusion after thinking a lot about this. I think, you know, if people want to sign petitions to get their colleagues fired, that's their right to do that. It's not something I consider honorable. It's not something I would recommend. It's not something that's going to win you my friendship. But you have the freedom to do that. You have the freedom to do that. But what is really disappointing is how universities have responded to that. Because they all of them said, okay, you have petitions, they want you to be fired, demoted, investigated. What does this mean? Investigating academics? What are you, like a criminal? Like, what is this? You're like, you know, it's normal that academics get investigated. That's not normal. That shouldn't be normal. You should not investigate somebody who has published a paper. And it's considered controversial for that. And then I think I wanted to say something. I think that's why we need peer review. Because you said, well, you know, this paper passed peer review. I can say this controversial thing because the people that are the gatekeepers, the people who are experts said that this makes sense. This makes sense. There are other peers who support me. And this supports my academic freedom. If we don't have that gatekeeping, then when people come after you, how to say, have academic freedom because my peers said that I was right and had support of other people. So I think I disagree on you with that. I think we need peer review to support academic freedom because that proves that we have somebody backing us up in a way.
That's a great point. Let me make two final points. You use an interesting word, honor. Honor, courage. Where do they come from? Do they come from Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Western civilization, Western philosophy, the ancient Greeks? Whatever it is, in the US, and I presume other places, K-12 schooling hasn't been doing it for a long time. Universities haven't been doing it for a long time. But you add to that, to go back to Dwight Eisenhower, we have large bureaucracies running everything we do now that are not about honor, they're about compliance. It's what bureaucracies do, it's what they are.
Mm-hmm.
We have to find ways to de-bureaucratize universities, and the final point I would make is, a good university where I want to send my kids to, what if people like you folks running it? That's not where we are now, hardly anywhere. I mean, St. John's, great book school, I guess, there's a couple of places, but almost nowhere. And we need to think about 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. How do we get to that place?
Bob, I have an honest answer for you about the courage. Francesca, I completely agree with you that the cancellation can be so overwhelming and so intense that there's probably no benefit. It's just harmful. But the honest answer to your question, where courage, whatever, I think part of it could be a class thing, a class dimension, which I would like to, I think we should look at that more. I think we're disproportionately working class background here, which is fascinating to me. But the honest to God answer to your question is, when Steve Pinker responds and says, yeah, Kev, sociology does need to be more apolitical, more interdisciplinary, more rigorous, that counts more than 50 emails of people saying, I hate you. When Lee Jussim says that, that's the honor, that is it. And and when I get an email from Michael or Musa, I mean, I respect Corey Clark. I could go on. I admire these people. I respect these people. And what I realize is that, if you don't respect the people who are criticizing you and you focus on the feedback from the people you respect, it becomes really easy to block it all out. So that's what got me going. And I've given a lot of compliments to people in this room that are very genuine. And I get a very humble response like, oh, no. I'm not a peer to you guys. Like, I look up to you and I admire you and I put you on I don't deify you, but I admire that you came before me. I admire that you took risks before me. And that provides an emotion that I don't know what the word is, but it's all the motivation that I think one needs.